Welcome to the debrief, everyone. New criminal accusations tonight involving R&B singer R. Kelly's marriage. Federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York say Kelly bribed a government official to produce fraudulent identification for an unnamed Jane Doe in 1994. The indictment does not explicitly point out that the bribery is said to have occurred one day before R. Kelly secretly attempted to marry 15-year-old singer Aaliyah Houghton, allegedly using paperwork which listed her age as 18. Aaliyah's family ultimately annulled that marriage before her death. Kelly's attorney told the Chicago Tribune the new accusations do not materially alter the criminal landscape in this case. Greenberg previously appeared on this broadcast to downplay the charges and the other accusers.
Obviously, the law of averages is going to catch up with us at some point. But, you know, it's this sort of buyer's remorse. In many of these cases, with many of these allegations, these were people that were ecstatic to be with R. Kelly. They were happy to be with R. Kelly. And now someone else has said to them, oh, no, it was no good. Times have changed. And in hindsight, they're sort of repurposing the encounters.
Three attorneys are with us tonight. Let's begin with Byron Brown in Phoenix. He's here with Eklund Mercy in Atlanta and Gigi Gonzalez in Miami. So let's kick this off here. The law of averages is eventually going to catch up. Is today the day when the law of averages is indeed catching up?
Yeah, I think it's caught up to him for sure. I mean, this is the kind of the first independent evidence that I've heard, at least, about this R. Kelly incident that plays into or directly links him to underage women. So, you know, I don't necessarily believe the lawyer when he says that, you know, this is buyer's remorse. I mean, I think that that's kind of, I would say, off color to say at this particular point. I mean, the girl was 15, R. Kelly's 26 around at the time this occurred, and I'm assuming these statements are being made because they have facts to back it up. So I definitely believe the law of averages has caught up to them at this point. It's not about to catch up, it's caught them.
Eklund Mercy in Atlanta. I mean, if we're talking about bribery, then we're probably talking about things that are written down here as opposed to just he said, she said accusations here.
It happened in 1994. It is 2019. The federal statute of limitations for bribery is 5 years. So I think that is just another way of just mucking up the case that we already have that's already pending.
Yeah, but so when you charge things, Eklund, as racketeering and whatnot, then you can kind of get around some of the statute of limitations and say there was this big criminal enterprise, and you can take some of that old stuff and roll it in all together and say, well, it's part of a big, huge enterprise. And that's what they're trying to do here. It's not really a new case. It's a superseding indictment filed on top of an old case.
But with that being said, it's the issue is that you're bringing up all these old things. My issue is you knew that these were issues beforehand. This ain't the first time he was charged with rape. This ain't the first time we've had issues with him with little children, with little girls or anything like that. He had a whole criminal trial. I remember that when I was in high school. So my issue is that you had that information beforehand. What did you do with it? Now suddenly it's a criminal mastermind. Now suddenly we're going back. I personally think that the state departments, I think that the prosecutors should deal with the cases that we have right now. I think that they're confusing things right now. I believe that all the witnesses now that you're coming from cases in 1994 have vested interest in these cases. They're getting shows, they're getting Netflix interviews, they're getting TV One interviews. So I do not believe that that should be used. I honestly don't. I think that they have enough evidence for the cases. He has pending cases with witnesses that are still alive, with current victims that are still here that could testify on their behalf. I think that they should be focused on that.
Gigi Gonzalez in Miami. So I understand Eklund's point here that we're dredging up a lot of very old information here, but it sounds to me like prosecutors are trying to say, hey, look, we're going to bolster the new accusations with some more concrete evidence from old accusations that make it more likely that he has done something wrong as a big enterprise. Normally, we do sit here and complain about that, though, and say, wait a minute, prosecutor, you need to charge each crime separately.
Generally, yes. But like you said earlier, with racketeering, you're allowed to bring in this old conduct, these old things, in order to establish a pattern of behavior, right? And in this case, R. Kelly, you have concrete evidence between Aaliyah's birth certificate, between, the bribe that was handed out on one day, and then the very next day having a marriage certificate with her new age, assigned to her. I think that goes to the strength of this prosecutor's case. So yes, it is bolstering, but I think it helps.
We can continue to debate this case as it moves along, but let's move along here tonight. Movie producer Harvey Weinstein returning to court today to face accusations he's shutting off his ankle monitor bracelet. Weinstein left court with help, complaining of back problems. Prosecutors say he dropped off the radar several times and they don't believe it's an accident. The defense says Weinstein's bracelet was malfunctioning or wasn't in range of cell towers. Weinstein is going on trial in New York in exactly 1 month to face sex crimes charges. Let's bring Gigi Gonzalez back in to discuss this case. So Gigi, what do you make of this? Do prosecutors have the upper hand, saying that this guy is a guy who ran a multi-million-dollar movie business? He ought to know how to keep his ankle monitor charged and communicating with the cell towers.
Yeah, you would think that he'd be competent enough to keep his bracelet functioning properly, right? And like you said, he ran such a successful, movie production company. Why can't he do this? I think the state is in a strong position. I don't think that his ankle monitor was, just sporadically glitching up, especially not over the course of, several times. I think that it will be really interesting to see how this plays out a month before his trial. Exactly.
Now, the state ultimately here, Gigi, wants to increase Weinstein's bail up to $5 million cash or $50 million bond. Should the judge grant the request or deny it?
I think they should grant it. I think the state is going to bring up a reasonable position that he is becoming a flight risk. They obviously can't trust him on this ankle monitor, on the $1 million bond. He's gone missing for hours. They don't know where he goes. I think it would be a good move to up the bond here.
Interesting opinions, Gigi. We'll see you again in a couple of minutes here. A status conference today in the case of the Connecticut woman accused of helping her wealthy boyfriend hide evidence of his wife's disappearance. Michelle Traconis appeared today facing charges of evidence tampering and hindering prosecution in the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. Fotis Dulos, Jennifer's husband and Michelle's boyfriend, faces the same charges. Today, the defense said it wanted to push the case to late January because it needs to obtain all of the state's evidence.
My understanding is counsel is requesting January 31st. I have no objection on that.
That's correct, Your Honor. We continue to do our investigation and examine the discovery.
All right. Counsel, I need your appearance in line 1. I don't have an appearance in line 1. That may come as a shock to you.
That is a shock to me.
If you get around to it,
I will certainly,
thank you.
We filed our appearances on the properties, but certainly.
Well,
I'll certainly do it here.
All right, thank you. January 31st. Thank you, Your Honor.
Boyfriend Fotis Dulos was in court this week on a civil case filed against him by his wife's family. The family says Fotis owes them $2.5 million. He says he does not owe the money. The money changed hands between the wealthy families, court documents say, to support Dulos' real estate ventures. After the civil trial, Dulos wished his wife and her family well for the holidays. The family has been very clear that it thinks Jennifer Dulos is dead. Let's go now to Eklund Mercy and Byron Braun one more time on this case. Byron, my guess is that the state and Traconis are doing a drawn-out dance here to basically determine whether or not there should be kind of a deal, whether or not a deal should be taken. Am I completely off my rockers, or do you think that's probably what's going on behind the scenes here?
No, I think that's fairly accurate. I mean, really common for lawyers to ask for additional time. They're saying the additional time is to get additional evidence from the prosecution, which could be, but I think to your point is probably more accurate that they want more time to work out a deal and vet out some issues behind the scene before and if this matter goes to trial.
Yeah, Eklund, we listened to that basic status conference here, and it's like, well, we're going to check in again in late January, but we need more time for an investigation and discovery. Eklund, is there anything we can read into the defense saying we need more discovery? Who is jockeying for what position here based on that statement?
Well, right now the defense has a difficult case, so it's a toss-up. You know, it could be guilty, it could be not guilty if you have a trial right now. So you really want to take this time to really discuss with your clients whether it's either we go hard or go home. What are you willing to do? So at this point, you have you have your attorney. You have the attorney and what they feel is is a suitable recommendation. You have the client who just wants to go home, and you have the prosecutor who also has a number. So I think that, this dance needs to be played to see, whether it's worth going to trial, or maybe they can work out something that everybody can be, okay with.
Yeah, you
so
can't play. You can't play a game of cards unless everybody has their hand dealt, and basically we're watching that procedure go out. So Eklund, just very quickly here, finally, if you're a criminal defendant like Fotis Dulos and your wife has been missing for about half a year, is it a good idea to wish her happy holidays?
No. And that's the problem. You can't control your client. They do things that just don't make sense. So, I mean, does it mean that he's a murderer? I don't know. Does it mean that he's not bright? Probably, but I don't think that it should go to his criminal prowess for doing. It's just untasteful. It's distasteful. I don't think it's something that equals to being a murderer.
I agree that it's distasteful. Of course, remember, both defendants have pleaded not guilty here, and Fotis Dulos thinks his wife is still alive and is hiding to spite him. That's been his story thus far. Let's move on now. 4 are dead and 8 are injured after a shootout at a Pensacola, Florida Naval Air Station. Authorities say the killer was a member of the Saudi military who was there for flight training. The shooter himself is dead, and the shooting comes one day after another shooting at the Pearl Harbor Navy Station in Hawaii.
We have fatalities, but we also have people who are wounded. Some, like the Escambia deputies, look like they're going to be okay. Some are still in surgery, so we're praying hard for those folks. I think there's obviously going to be a lot of questions about, this individual being a foreign national, being a part of the Saudi Air Force, and then to be here training on our soil to do this. And the FBI is working with DOD, they're working with FDLE, they're working with the Escambia County Sheriffs to answer those questions. One of the things that I talked to the president about is, given that this was a foreign national in the employ of a foreign service, and there'll be time to do this, but obviously the government of Saudi Arabia needs to make things better for these victims, and I think that they are going to owe a debt here, given that this is one of their individuals.
And from tragedy to celebration now, as we look at the other side of life reflected in our nation's courtrooms. A 5-year-old boy in Kent County, Michigan was so excited to be adopted that he invited his entire kindergarten class to the hearing. Watching from the gallery, his classmates waved paper hearts on sticks. Several of the students told the judge that the adoptee, Michael, is their best friend and that they love him. As the judge banged his gavel, completing the adoption, Michael joined his new family, and teachers and parents broke out in applause in that courtroom in Michigan. And still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, the trial of a man accused of shooting a police officer in the face. Americans know the officer from the hit A&E show Live PD. A breakdown of key testimony this week when we return. Testimony will resume next week against an Arizona man accused of shooting a Live PD officer in the face. Ramon Bueno is the defendant. Trooper James Casey is the victim who survived that shooting. Casey is slated to testify. The state says Bueno fired from the passenger seat of a car and struck Casey. The woman driving that car, Lori Richardson, pleaded guilty to hindering prosecution and will receive only probation. For her safety, the judge ordered us not to show her face or even broadcast her voice. Law&Crime's Rachel Stockman breaks down the testimony.
Lori Richardson says on the night in question, she agreed to give a few people she didn't know a ride in exchange for gas money. The passengers put a crate in her trunk and told her where to drive. When Trooper James Casey pulled them over, Richardson said her male passenger said, "I'm not going back in." 2 more officers arrived. Richardson says she heard a loud noise, and then the male passenger told Richardson to start the effing car. She says she only saw a silhouette of a gun. Bullets were flying as Richardson drove away. Two of the passengers jumped out of her car. She ultimately abandoned her car at a vacant house. A few days later, a friend convinced her to call police. Richardson admits she didn't tell investigators the truth at first. She did name defendant Ramon Bueno to authorities, but did not directly ID him as the shooter. She did say the shooter was sitting directly behind her. When asked if Trooper Casey did anything to prompt being shot, Richardson said, no, he was actually really nice. I'm Rachel Stockman for Law&Crime.
Richardson's car was heavily damaged during that shootout. She fled and eventually got stuck on railroad tracks. A detective took the stand to describe the damage to the 2008 Mercury Sable.
I noted that in the exterior of the vehicle there were numerous bullet holes, approximately 13 in the rear of the vehicle and then 4 on the hood of the vehicle. I also noted that...
Did you say the hood of the vehicle?
I'm sorry, I meant the roof of the vehicle.
Okay. So 13 in the rear, and how many on the roof?
4.
Okay, tell us more.
So I also noted that the rims on the passenger side had dents in the rims, as if the vehicle had gone over a curb or some other hard surface. I also noted that on the tread of the right rear tire, there was what appeared to be red paint. The exterior of the passenger side tires also appeared to be scuffed on the sidewall, and the driver's side front tire also had a dent on the rim, and it appeared it had gone over some curb or some other structure.
The jury asked that detective about bullet trajectory, possibly in an attempt to clear up different stories about where the gunshots originated and even from what window the gunshots were fired.
There were multiple projectiles recovered from inside the vehicle. One projectile was recovered from the floorboard area, I believe, of the passenger side. And it was just a projectile sitting on the floor. So I don't know if any of those, that one could be from the hole through the headliner, because the third one in that pattern came through there. But I don't know what the results are of any bullet testing, if they all came back to firearms consistent with what the other DPS officers had or some other firearm.
Was the headliner removed and the space between the headliner and inside of the roof searched?
Yes, we did remove the entire headliner, recover items from the headliner.
Would the defects in the roof from the bullets be consistent with someone, rear driver's side passenger, holding their arm out of the window and shooting over the roof?
Yes.
Defendant Ramon Bueno's DNA turned up on a laptop found inside Richardson's car. We don't know much about the laptop yet, but the jury was certainly curious about it.
Were you able to log into the computer?
No, I was not. And we don't typically do that. We'll author a search warrant, and I did author a search warrant for the download of that computer, and we have people who are trained specifically on how to do that.
Did you find anything leading to the owner?
I did not review the download of data from the computer. The case agent, I believe, reviewed the download, but from my recollection, the amount of information that we could get from a Chromebook was very limited. The Chromebooks only hold a very small amount of information on the actual device, and most of the information is held in the cloud or in Google.
Let's bring everybody back in to discuss this case before we wrap up for the evening. Eklund Mercy in Atlanta, let's start with you. Eklund, I'm convinced that this defendant, Ramon Bueno, was in the car. The question is, did he pull the trigger? Do we have enough evidence at this point to know for sure?
No, we don't. The state has kind of sullied the jury in trying to state that it was a gang activity, that Bueno is a part of the gang. And the problem I have with that argument is that you're saying, oh, everybody looks alike. And if you don't believe that they look alike, then they're all a part of the same kind of criteria. They're a part of the same type of group. So I think that the state kind of failed on this one. They have all the witnesses they need. They had 2 officers. One was shot, but they had 2 whole other officers that were there at the scene that should be able to make the case for the state.
Byron Brown, again, we've got another discrepancy here about exactly where the shots were fired. Some people are saying, one of the witnesses there at the hotel where this happened, that they were fired out through that busted back window. The police are trying to say they were fired out of a side window. Does it matter here?
It matters to bring in the question of doubt, which I think exists heavily right now. I've heard some testimony that it's the rear driver, person sitting behind the driver. Other times I feel like it's been mentioned that it's a front passenger then shooting out over the hood or the roof, sorry. So I think what they're doing, the prosecution, is unwittingly or maybe just from a lack of preparation, aiding the defense of it, because I don't think they have any evidence that's going to be able to directly identify Bueno as the shooter. Maybe a lot of circumstantial evidence, but I don't think they've done anything yet to prove a clear and convincing past. And to Eklund's point, a lot of the references to the gang and stuff could be exactly that. They're trying to say, hey, it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's a duck, but we'll wait and see what the jury does.
Yeah, exactly. And Gigi Gonzalez, I wanted to go there with you. There were a lot of objections in this case trying to say, the defense trying to say the prosecution shouldn't be bringing in basically tattoos that the defendant had and say, oh, well, this proves a gang affiliation. And the defense objected and said, well, we're trying to get in front of the jury that this guy was in prison before, which is a big no-no. And the judge said, don't go there. But this attempt to convict this defendant by saying he's basically a bad guy who was involved in gang activity, make him look like a bad guy. And, well, let's forgive the rest of the confusion here and just say, well, he was probably in the car and he's a bad guy, convict. That doesn't seem like a sound strategy for the state, in my opinion.
Doesn't sound like it to me either. I think that the introduction and explanation of the tattoos is very prejudicial. I don't think it's relevant in this situation. However, in Arizona, the state is allowed to argue that because you are in a gang, you are, if you are convicted, your sentence should be enhanced. So the state's position in this case by introducing these tattoos is to make clear that he is a part of a gang so that if they earn a conviction, they can enhance his sentence.
Yeah,
but I do not think it's relevant.
Sever the trial, make the trial on the actual killing fair, and then deal with the sentencing later. That's another way to possibly do it. Appreciate the insight from the panel tonight here on the Debrief. That's all the time we have. We'll be back here Monday at 5 o'clock Eastern, right here on the Law and Crime Network. We'll see you then.